the amount listed. Item 6 is the 2016 Northern Lights Express fees. That's to continue participating with that group. Item 7 is the agreement with the City of New Brighton for emergency backup water supply and wholesale water, part of our constellation of water customers. Item 8 is the bid of 6th Avenue North Street Reconstruction Project. That's accepting the low bid to proceed with that. That'll be referred to Ways and Means. Item 9 is the bid for construction of the Americans for Disabilities Act pedestrian intersection ramps. And that's accepting the low bid of TZAC Concrete Incorporated for just under $1.5 million to furnish and deliver materials and labor for that work, which is considerable. Item 10 is the bid for the turf establishment, accepting low bid of Lionel Lakes Landscaping to do that work. Item 11 is the bid for large diameter storm sewer cleaning, accepting the low bid of Sewer Services Incorporated to proceed with that work. Item 12 is the bid for gray black Class A aggregate, and that's accepting the single bid, and we did assess that bid to compare it with other pricing, and it was consistent with Dresser Trap Incorporated to provide that material. Item 13 is the bid for Nicollet Mall reconstruction planting and accepting the low bid of wetland habitat restoration to proceed with that work for that element, very important element of that project. And that is the consent item. Does anyone wish to pull any item? Seeing none, I will move all items for approval as stated. All in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That carries. We now have before us a public hearing, which is two projects, and it's a public hearing, Bryant Avenue North and Warrington Area Residential Street Resurfacing Projects. Good morning, Director Cockey.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Mike Kennedy, our Director of Transportation Maintenance and Repair, will make the presentation this morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Mike Kennedy, Director of Transportation Maintenance and Repair for Public Works. We're here this morning for the public hearing for the Bryant Avenue North and Warrington Area Residential Resurfacing Project. On January 15th, 2016, the City Council designated the location, streets, and improvements proposed to be made in the resurfacing program for this year for both Bryant and the Warrington Area Residential projects. The locations of the streets in these projects for Warrington, it's as shown on the overhead there, is basically the Warrington residential project, but it also includes 4th Avenue, which is an MSA street from 38th Street to Lake. And Bryant Avenue North is Bryant Avenue North from 45th Avenue to 53rd Avenue North up to the city limits. The proposed street resurfacing special assessments were determined by applying the 2016 uniform assessment rates to the land area of benefited properties located within the street influence zone along the improved streets. 2016 resurfacing assessment rates that were applied are 63 cents per square foot for non-residential properties and 21 cents per square foot for residential properties. The proposed total assessment amount for the Bryant and Warrington area residential projects is about $1.5 million. There were community meetings held for both projects, and so today our recommendation is passage of a resolution ordering the city engineer to proceed and do the work and adopt special assessments in the amount of $235,020.11 for Bryant and $1,287,466.49 for the Warrington project, and passage of a resolution requesting the Board of Estimate and Taxation to authorize the city to issue and sell assessment bonds in the combined amount of $1,522,490 for these projects. That concludes my presentation. You can take questions if you'd like.
Thank you. Any questions per the presentation? Seeing none, thank you very much. And I will now open up the public hearing. Anyone sign in? Does anyone wish to come forward and give testimony? Anyone wish to come forward? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and move approval per the staff presentation. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That carries. Thank you very much. We now can move into our discussion section of the agenda, and with that we have three items. And the first item is item 14, the Minnesota State Aid System revisions.
Mr. Chair, Nathan Koster from our Transportation Planning and Programming Division will make this presentation.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Nathan Koster, Supervisor, Transportation Planner, and Transportation Planning and Program Division of Public Works. This morning, I'll be providing a presentation on the municipal state aid street system revisions. I provided a brief presentation overviewing what we're requesting this morning and a description of our work as well as our recommendations. This morning, we'll be requesting passage of a resolution requesting the Minnesota Commissioner of Transportation to make removals removals from in addition to the municipal state aid street system of the city of Minneapolis. This impacts wards 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 11, 12, and 13. In advance of this resolution being prepared, outreach was conducted with all the council members, which we were bringing forward recommendations for removals and additions to the state aid street system. So as far as the presentation and discussion today, I'll be providing a background of what exactly the municipal state aid street system is, as well as a discussion of what our assessment was to make these recommendations, and then identify the recommendations that are being brought forth today. As far as the background of what is the municipal state aid system, the municipal state aid system was established by the state legislature in 1958, and this allows cities with greater than 5,000 residents to designate up to 20% of their local system mileage to the municipal state aid system. And this is a source of transportation funds for the local transportation funds provided by the state, and this is generally the source of the highway user tax distribution fund. And typically for the entire state, this is about $170 million, of which the city of Minneapolis typically obtains about $16 million annually. The selection criteria for these municipal state aid streets is typically streets that already carry heavier traffic volumes. Their collector or arterial routes is defined by the functional classification system. They connect major points of interest such as parks, commercial areas, and they're formed with an integrated system such that municipal state aid routes connect with other trunk highways, other municipal state aid street systems, and other county routes. So it's more of a grid network. The reason why we brought forth this recommendation today is we took a broader systems assessment and evaluated currently what are all the streets in our municipal state aid system, trying to align those with the goals and criteria identified in the city's transportation plan, Access Minneapolis. We also wanted to take this chance to look at our system as a whole, to take into consideration changing land uses, recent construction projects, evolving traffic patterns, and modifications to the transportation system with capital projects that are occurring throughout the city. And this is also a good time that there was some revisions of the state aid funding formulas, so we wanted to make sure how well we were aligning with those. So this work included reviewing our current municipal state aid system and non-existing municipal state aid system routes, determining where there would be room for potential removals from our existing system and additions to the system. And as a part of this is the goal is establishing a framework for changes that could be implemented over time, such that we are bringing forward our near-term recommendations today, but also laying forth a framework for midterm and long-term changes. There were a number of factors and criteria that we took into account as for this methodology. That includes the average daily traffic volume on these streets, that I'll refer to as ADT, looking at the street typology, functionality, and context. I'll dive into that a little bit later in a following slide. Looking at the multimodal characteristics, if it does serve existing truck traffic, and as far as the system continuity and connectivity, how it's tying in and integrating with our existing system. Other special considerations that were taken into account were if there were one-way streets, the adjacent MSA systems of adjacent cities such as St. Louis Park, Robbinsdale, and St. Anthony, and non-existing routes currently on our state aid system but are non-existing, and future transportation projects, and additionally payback requirements such that if we have used MSA funds recently on a MSA project, that we were not required to incur additional funds to remove it from our state aid system, because if we take something off that we'd recently used funds on, we would incur a cost. So we want to take that into consideration as well. So I color-coded what the assessment entailed. It's more along the lines of a four-tiered system as far as, is there very good alignment with our current method, the factors and criteria laid forth, good alignment, fair alignment, and poor alignment. And what this took into consideration, as I previously mentioned, was primarily the average daily traffic volumes, the functionality of the street, as I refer to as street typology, the location within the city, and the connectivity to other routes, and making sure all the termini of the streets were extended to the nearest adjacent system. So making sure we align, we really want to tie this to the existing functionality of our street system, such that Access Minneapolis defines a number of street typologies, and I color-coded these as well to tie in with how well they align with our system, tying the functionality of the street towards our recommendations to make sure that anything that is on the state aid system aligns with the functionality and characteristics of a state aid street, such that our commuter, commerce, activity, and community connector streets that do serve higher purposes are very strong candidates to remain on the system, or if they're not on the system, let's look to get them on. And then when you see the orange to red routes, those are more of the routes that don't serve as a great functionality of serving traffic or connecting major points of interest. Those were either, if they were on the state system, they were looked to be removed so that we could come up with a number of recommendations. So as far as the recommendations that we did bring forth, I did mention that we looked at a number of factors and criteria. And one of the main points I do want to bring forth is, out of the 206 miles of municipal state aid system routes we have, roughly about 85% of those routes are already aligning with a lot of the factors and criteria mentioned. So it did leave a very small subset of routes that were looked at for removals from the current system. So what we want to do is set up a framework to implement these changes over 5 years, as I had mentioned. So today we brought forth our near-term recommendations, which is approximately 3.5 miles coming off and going on. So there's an equal swap. And in order, when we bring forth these recommendations, we have a cap of 20% of our system, as I mentioned, which is 206 miles. So we had to balance both the additions to and removals from the system. So what we wanted to focus on today, or on our initial near-term recommendations, is with our additions, we want to add routes that already are serving and providing mobility for higher ADTs and align with the factors and criteria such that they serve a higher functionality, and then remove routes that have lower traffic volumes and aren't serving the higher uses as defined by this analysis. So I'll briefly go over the requested removals from the system and the additions to. And today we're bringing forth removals of approximately 3.5 miles. I'll briefly cover these on the screen, then I'll display a map so we can see them visually. But the removals we're requesting are Cleveland Street Northeast, Summer to Broadway, Summer Street Northeast, Cleveland to Stinson, Winter Street Northeast, Hoover to Delano, Delano Street Northeast, Winter to Spring, Harding Street Northeast, Broadway to Summer, Summer Street Northeast, Taft to Harding. And I think I went through quite a bit there, and I think this is a good point just to bring up the map and just briefly identify where some of these streets are. If there's a way to zoom in. But primarily these routes that I had mentioned, the first 6, are located in Northeast. They are very short segment streets serving very low traffic volumes, under 500 vehicles a day, and primarily serving local land uses and single properties. The next streets I'd like to highlight that would be for removal would be 5th Street South from Chicago to 11th. This street is located downtown, and this street is being removed with all the construction with the Vikings Stadium, US Bank Stadium. So this will no longer, we're requesting this no longer be in the system, seeing as how it's a road closure. The next grouping of streets that we are proposing to come off the system would be Diagonal Roadway from 24th to Kasota, Granary Road, 11th to 25th Ave, Oak Street, 6th Street Southeast to Diagonal Roadway, and Malcolm Ave, Granary to Kasota. And these streets are primarily non-existing routes. They currently are planned routes, and since they are non-existing, they do not carry any traffic volume. So aligning with our criteria, we'd like to put more roads on that currently do exist and do carry traffic volumes. Then the last two routes that I would like to highlight for removals was Snelling Ave, 22nd to 24th, and 24th Street Southeast, Snelling to Minnehaha. And on the map you see here, these are also two very short segments serving primarily adjacent properties and having very low ADTs. The requested additions totaling approximately 3.7 miles, I'll walk through briefly. 33rd Ave Northeast from Central to Stinson, Van Wyck Memorial Boulevard from 7th Street North to Glenwood Ave, 20th Ave South, 4th Street to Riverside, 36th Ave South, 34th Street to 38th, 54th Street West, Xerxes to Upton, 58th Street West, Lyndale to Nicollet, 10th Ave South, 3rd Street to 2nd Street, 3rd Street South, 10th Ave to 12th Ave, 12th Ave South, 3rd Street to 2nd Street, and 2nd Street South, 11th Ave to 12th Ave. And I'll briefly highlight these on the map. Thirty-third Ave North, indicated here with the black line for the additions, is an extension of existing state aid route from a neighboring city and adjoining to Central Ave. Van Wyck Boulevard, highlighted by the black line in number 39, would be creating a connection from 7th Street to Glenwood. This route carries approximately 5,000 vehicles a day and would provide additional connectivity in the state aid system. And Route 45 is an extension of 20th. This provides the last connection from Riverside to 4th for a short extension of an existing municipal state aid route. And since the map's already on it, highlighting the last four I called out in downtown, 10th Ave, 3rd Ave, 12th Ave, and 2nd. Primarily all of the city streets in downtown are in the municipal state aid system, providing both circulation and access to a lot of the downtown land uses. And these were identified as routes that do carry moderate traffic volumes that would enhance the integration and connectivity of the downtown municipal state aid network, which is why they were added or recommended to be added. Route 59, this is an extension of 36th Ave South. It is already an existing municipal state aid route and is looking for an extension from 34th Street East to 38th Street East and does carry moderate traffic volumes in this area. And then the last two routes would be 54th Street West, which would be highlighted on the map by number 60, and this would be looking to extend the municipal state aid route from Xerxes to Upton. And then the last one I'll be calling out today would be 58th Street West, Lyndale to Nicollet. And this would be extending 58th for the segment between Lyndale and Nicollet. And it already carries moderate traffic volumes for this segment. With that being said, this concludes my presentation. I'll stand by for any questions that you do have.
Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the report and also how thorough it is and the criteria. And I don't necessarily object to any of the removals. I will note to my colleagues here that the second ward is a clear net loser in all of this in terms of who's losing MSA routes, if that's where we think there might be something good. And typically, when we have an MSA route, we appreciate that because it also it offers an alternative funding. But there's some roads that were planned that never got built, and this is in Prospect North area. There's a Granary Road. I'm sure everybody on this committee has heard of that, an extension of Malcolm, a connection that's missing. So my question and what I think that is going to be important for me to be able to share with, there's 18, 19, 17, and 20, share with residents and constituents back there is, if something happens in the next year or 2 or 3, where all of a sudden we have more interest in actually completing some of these gaps and missing infrastructure, and I have hopes that we will. It may not be the line that's on that map, but somewhere. How much flexibility do we have to add a route back? Is that something that has to come back to the council for approval? How much notice would we need? Those kinds of questions.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Gordon, that is a good question. And much like the presentation today, this would require another administrative change and request. And seeing as how we did a more holistic study looking at a number of routes for additions and removals from the system, you see the numbers aren't sequential. So there are a lot of other ones that we didn't bring forth today that would be more in the mid to long term. We could do this similar thing as far as bringing forward to put them back on the system if there was movement towards or other plans to construct those routes. And the designation of the municipal stated system particularly doesn't imply any priorities or recommendations for these routes. It's merely looking at the criteria and allocating our mileage to currently existing routes that carry higher volumes or have a higher purpose that we could get on the system for additional needs-based funding.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Any further questions or commentary? See none. Certainly appreciate the thoughtfulness that went into this. We now have a very transparent system for evaluation, and I think that will serve us well moving forward. So particularly as we look at the mid and long-term adjustments that we might contemplate. So appreciate the work and definitely appreciate the tool we have before us. With that, I will move a resolution requesting that the Minnesota Commissioner of Transportation to make removals and additions to the municipal state aid system of the city of Minneapolis as described in the staff report. Any further conversations? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That carries, and thank you very much. We'll now move to item 15 on the discussion area of the agenda. And that's the Franklin Avenue, Cedar Avenue, Minnehaha Avenue intersection modifications project.
Mr. Chair, Alan Klugman from our Traffic and Parking Services will make the presentation.
Morning.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. Today we're seeking layout approval for the Franklin Cedar Minnehaha intersection modification project. I think, as you know, this area has been studied and examined for many, many years, and the current effort that we'll be talking about today has been in the works for about 2 years. Now, the project we have before us today is a joint effort with Hennepin County and City of Minneapolis. And as you know, Franklin and Cedar are both county roads. Minnehaha is a city street. And so the county has led this effort. They've led the development. The city and the county have partnered together with it, but the county has led this. And for today, I'd like to introduce one of the members of the county design staff who managed the project, and he'll lead us through some of the details of the project, and then I'll stay nearby for any questions and to wrap up the presentation today. But what I'd like to introduce is Bob Byers. Bob is a senior transportation engineer with Hennepin County. Again, he's managed the development and design of this project, and he has a short presentation that'll show some of the features and highlights of the new design. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome and good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, council members. Yes, I'm Bob Byers. I'm with the Hennepin County Public Works. I've been working away, as Alan mentioned, for the last couple of years on this item. And we'd like to give you a brief presentation of kind of where we're at with this project this morning. Certainly, if ever a picture gives you 1,000 words or provides 1,000 words, this is it. This area, I think most of you are aware, has been under discussion for many, many years. It goes back to the dawn of time when the railroads were added, and you can see a transportation system of a diagonal nature that tries to meet the gridded nature of Minneapolis. And and all the challenges that then exist when you try to bring those two things into conformance. There's been a need for improvements for some time. There's been some things that have been done as well, but there's always been things that have been left behind, issues that have never really been resolved. And this area has really had high crash rates, high safety issues for a number of years, still does today. As my examples kind of on the bottom of the slide there show, it's been a top 10 crash problem for bikes. It's been high on the pedestrian crash lists for a number of years. A couple of years ago, the Pedestrian Advisory Committee brought this as an option of priority. It's been an option and priority for the bike group as well. And from the vehicle standpoint, it's also been a problem, primarily due to some of the visibility problems and just a busy area, a lot of traffic trying to go through this area. So it's confusing to motorists. It has some strange things of nearby highway ramps, but it's not obvious as to really what lanes you should be in and how you should get there. But there's some really good things that have been going on. As I mentioned, some improvements that have been done. The county and the city have been working away along the Franklin Avenue corridor for a number of years trying to get the bikeways added. And to the east of this area, we've got them pretty much all the way to the Mississippi River now along Franklin Avenue. The city has a project this summer east of Riverside to the river where they're going to convert to a what's called a protected bike lane to improve the safety even further. And the county is rebuilding the Franklin Avenue Bridge across the Mississippi, and we also are adding what's called a protected bikeway system as part of that. So we're working our way down the corridor, and this is one more element from the bike standpoint that goes kind of hand in hand with that. At the same time, the Native American Community Development Institute recently has been working with a project on this big wide median that's underneath the overpasses there of Highway 55. And they've been trying to change that area in its view and make it sort of a destination, sort of an art area, something that a marketplace, something more than just a wide grass median. We've been working with them. That project kind of evolved over the last couple of years, and they have built some improvements here in the last year or so. And that project brought into question, what about this area underneath the overpasses? It's sort of a strange freeway design that doesn't match the way Franklin Avenue looks on either end of this project. It's a vestige of things that have happened over time, decisions that have been made, but doesn't really fit the character of the area. And about the same time that conversation was going on, our maintenance folks were telling us that the pavements on Franklin Avenue and Cedar Avenue were reaching the end of their life. They needed to come in, do some milling and overlaying. So that raised the question of perhaps there was an opportunity to look at some of these issues again. The way we approached it was maybe a little different. Rather than trying to develop a plan and then present it to everyone and say, here's what we think ought to be done, we knew that there had been challenges in the past. One of the reasons that some of the larger scale improvements had not been built, we believe, is that there was an issue of developing consensus. There are lots of ideas, and there was this big vision of improvement, but how do you bring everybody together to something that everyone can accept, can buy into? So what we did is try to approach a number of the stakeholders, a number of the folks who had ideas, had been drawing away for years, things that they thought should be done, and try to take those ideas and develop it into some sort of a plan, something that we actually could handle right now within the resources that we had. And that's quite a challenge, trying to keep something within a scope, within a cost that you really can deal with. There was a lot of back and forth discussion about that. So in these stakeholder and public engagement efforts, that's really what we were trying to do. And as you can see, the neighborhood was a real big part of this, helped us through that discussion. Seward Redesign, who's an advocate for redevelopment and a link to some of the business interests, also was very, very much a help in this discussion. And a new player, the Minneapolis Bike Coalition, actually stepped in and helped us in a number of ways in terms of reaching parts of the community that we normally wouldn't have coming to some of these meetings, groups that maybe are a little harder to get to. So they helped us in this. So these groups kind of working together with us really were a key thing in terms of trying to trying to reach this consensus that we're trying to get to. So what are the elements that we're talking about, the key improvement elements? This green area here in the center of the drawing is a removal of portion of Minnehaha Avenue, which has been a vision in a lot of these ideas for a number of years. It's basically taking that portion of the roadway out. And what it does for us is it tries to get back to that gridded system and take out part of the diagonal problem of some of these strange maneuvers, travel patterns that go on. By taking out that portion of Minnehaha, it allows us to take out the traffic signal that exists right there at Minnehaha and Franklin, which is very close to the one at Cedar. By doing that, it allows us to concentrate at Cedar and Franklin and make that one single intersection work a lot more efficiently. But it has trade-offs. By doing that kind of a thing, it changes travel patterns. It changes how people would have to go through the area, and it makes it a little more circuitous to get to Minnehaha Avenue. So that brings the third element there of providing a southbound left turn lane. Maybe can I use the cursor? So, yeah, here it is. So down here, in that spot, we provide a opening, which is not there today, in the median to provide a southbound left turn lane to continue a movement back to Minnehaha to the south. So that kind of goes hand in hand with these other changes that we're talking about. As you can see, there's some pink areas on the drawing, and those are basically extensions of concrete medians and so forth, channelization that we're talking about adding. What that does is it lines up a lot of the vehicular traffic so that they can see, they have the right visibility so they can see to make their maneuvers. And that's one of the problems in the history today in terms of the crashes, is that especially left turners don't have the visibility on the rush hours to see beyond the waiting queues on the other side that are trying to turn left. And that results in a lot of crashes because they're taking chances in terms of making some of those turn maneuvers. Of course, I mentioned the extension of the bike lanes. So part of this thing is to continue those things to the west through the NACD project that's there on the median and keep on rolling to the west. It helps us, these improvements here help us bring up the visibility of the pedestrian crossings and tries to tighten up some of those crossings, make them a little bit shorter than they are today, make it a little more obvious as to what is the travel pattern for pedestrians through this area. And actually that's really how all these elements sort of come together. They try to, whether you're a driver, whether you're a bicyclist, whether you're a pedestrian, it tries to give you information as to where should you be to best traverse this area. And by doing that, we think we can reduce a lot of the conflicts and improve the safety. And there's a couple of city operational changes too that I think Alan had in the paperwork here that talks about some changes to the street system just to the east. So here on 20th Avenue, which right now is a one-way northbound, we're talking about modifying that to two ways to allow two-way directions, and the same thing here with 9th Street. And the reasons behind that is actually to try to mitigate some of what we're doing that's going to affect those local property owners right there in that northeast quadrant. Taco Bell, for instance, this is a fairly significant change for access to that property. And Resources, Inc., who's just to the north of Taco Bell, also, it's going to have some impact on how they get to their property. So by providing a two-way 20th, we thought that would help mitigate that somewhat. But that pink line in the center there across, I'm going to keep switching here, but across Minnehaha, this is a serious change. It eliminates the ability to turn left off Franklin to go south on Minnehaha, and it also eliminates the ability to come north on Minnehaha and turn left. So that changes some of these travel patterns and makes some of them more circuitous. They're not major movements today. They're fairly small movements, but nonetheless, it will affect some things. So we had to talk with the fire station because it affects them. Their emergency vehicles coming in and out, as well as, like I say, the local property owners. So I think that pretty much summarizes the elements that we're talking about here today. I guess if there are any questions, or Alan, if I missed anything. And
Well, thank you for that overview, and I'm glad you took the time. And many people are familiar with this sort of beastly constellation of intersections that I think this will go a long way to tame. So, Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much. And this, I think perhaps I was even president of the neighborhood association back in the 90s when discussions about this started. Because when the LRT line went in, the Hiawatha line back then, there was concerns about access to it and even development potential. And so this has been a long time in coming. And I have to say, I've gotten lots of compliments, especially recently, about the county and their work with the neighborhood group and with businesses in the area. And this is fantastic, and I'm very supportive. I've got some questions or some things that I'd just like to highlight that maybe are unfinished yet. The one issue that I'm not sure is clear is how bikes are supposed to get from Franklin, especially if they're heading west up to the light rail station so they can get on that Hiawatha Trail. Actually, there's kind of like deer paths on both sides of Franklin right now that people use, or pedestrian paths, but they're openings, and there's a sidewalk that some bikers use. So it's confusing. It's a piece I'd love to have clarified. Is there a theory about how that's supposed to happen? And also coming off, I guess, from the station going east, that's unclear too.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Councilman Gordon, yes, there are a number of ideas there, thoughts, and there's actually some things in the works that probably will help improve it. They're probably going to move on separate kind of timelines from what we're trying to do with this work, but there is some redevelopment going on along Cedar Avenue that Seward Redesign is involved in. That trail along the east side of Cedar eventually will connect down to the Hiawatha Trail, so there's a connection there that's coming. These shortcuts that you mentioned that kind of try to work their way, kind of, there's all sorts of cow paths and so forth that people, as they're trying to get to the station, we've looked at some of those patterns, and there are ideas to try to improve them, but some of it involves negotiation with local property owners. Some of it involves actually city-owned property and how we might work with some corners that the city owns to try to improve it. So yeah, there are ideas with a network of how you could travel through this area and get to the station on bike, but some of them kind of required things that went beyond what we could do within the timeline of what we're doing right now. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to stick with it and continue.
And I'll call out another one of those is where 20th, if you look where the freeway is and where 20th is, I don't know if my colleagues can see that, but it's also where 9th Street and 20th kind of meet at that intersection. You can also see some clear paths leading up that little slope. That's where a lot of bikes and pedestrians will go now as they're coming back and
here on the aerial.
Yes. So that's something to be worked out, and I'm pretty sure the MDOT is involved maybe in that too. It's awfully close to the freeway anyway. And which calls attention to one concern that I have, because Augsburg College is right up there. So you go, that's where people will go to get there. It's also, 20th is the major bike path that gets you into the University of Minnesota campus. It's a significant connection that we've built. And a lot of bikers and pedestrians who are getting to Augsburg and the university or coming from there want to avoid this horrendous intersection. So they'll take this path and they'll go down to 20th and 9th. The two-way will allow some flexibility there. But then when you get to Franklin, if you're a pedestrian or a biker, and the way it's shown on this, it looks like there's actually a pink, it probably won't be pink when it's built, but there's a pink, that would be fun though. There's there's a median there that says bikers and pedestrians shouldn't cross there. We don't want you to cross there. If you're a pedestrian and you get there, you'd look, and it would seem pretty ridiculously far away to get to a light to actually make a crossing. So I'm pretty sure if it was me and a lot of other people, we'd cross there anyway. There's also 2 lanes of traffic coming in one direction and then 1 lane and a bike path in the other. I also think a lot of bikers will decide they're just going to work their way over or around that too. Have we thought about that? And would there be any way to make it safer and easier for bikes and pedestrians? Well, we also don't want to have cars and trucks using it.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Gordon, yes, all of those things you mentioned. There's been a lot of discussion. There's a lot of ideas. I'll quickly mention a couple of things that may help this situation, maybe in the next year or two, depending on how opportunities go. On So let's see, start on 20th, maybe on my little cursor here. Here we go. So the city is coming through in a couple years, building a protected bikeway down 20th. It's not right now known how that's going to be configured, but it looks like there might be a possibility of connecting here at this cow path. In other words, we may have an option here of trying to emphasize or trying to facilitate this north-south movement that you're talking about, that people are going to want to go anyways. There's a redevelopment of the old Blue Nile site that's being discussed. As part of that, we've talked about, can decisions be made with the city and with the property owner to try to leave some ability for us to widen that median, pull the property line down a little bit, widen that median on Franklin to provide a two-stage crossing, refuge island kind of design that would allow this connection from Minnehaha across Franklin up 20th to connect to that protected bikeway. So that's another one of those things, kind of like the other group of things we talked about, that they're sort of in abeyance at the moment, but we are thinking about them. And the idea is that we will, when the opportunity occurs, we will try to step in and make those future improvements as well. Like I said at the beginning, that's been one of the problems maybe holding us back over the years, is that the vision and what we want to do is so large that if we try to do it all today, we just can't get there. But if we do this incrementally, we believe, and we keep our eye on this thing, we believe we will get there. It's going to take a few different increments of improvement to do this.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and that we're thinking about that for the future too. And just generally, I'm very supportive of where this is going, and I'll keep an eye on it too as it moves forward.
Councilmember Bender?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't go back as far as Councilmember Gordon, but I remember very early discussions of this project too, and it's really evolved. And I really wanted to commend the county and our staff for doing such an engaged process for designing this roadway. I think when we ask the community what they want to see, especially in this iterative way, we're really able to get to some great things in the city. I wondered if you could talk more about the space that we get back from this pretty bold change of removing this section of Minnehaha Avenue. And I wondered if there had been discussions about redevelopment of this area. I'm looking at the sort of large surface parking lot nearby, realize that's privately owned, but I imagine there had maybe been discussions about that. I could see why the community might prefer a green space, but just wondered if you could talk through some of the discussions that happened about what to do with the space that we get back.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bender, members of the committee, very good question that you raised. And I guess what I would just stress is that as part of this project, we'll be closing off that piece of Minnehaha. The pavement will come out, it'll grass or sod will be put in. And really the thing I can tell you now is that the points you brought up are well understood with our design team and with the neighborhood stakeholders, but truly nothing's advanced on that is what I'd have to tell you.
Who owns that section of right-of-way?
Well, that's City Street,
Or
Minnehaha.
the county?
No, Minnehaha, the part we see in green is City Street.
owned. Okay.
And I'd also point out that there's large utilities underneath there too, in addition to the street infrastructure. So there's significant efforts that would need to be looked at if something were to happen there. I think part of your question also had to do with Taco Bell as a adjoining landowner. We've had numerous conversations. We've been actually to their corporate headquarters, the local franchisee, a number of times to keep them abreast of this project and keep them in tune with what's happening. I'll just tell you this, at least at this time, they've expressed no particular desire to be involved with that property or to look at development or anything like that. So we've just kept them in the loop in terms of what's happening and fully understand that there'll be continued discussions in terms of what's the use and function of that property and how's it maintained into the future.
So in the short term, it will simply be green space like grass, and then potentially in the future, we'll be able to look at other opportunities.
Correct. Yeah. And one detail, very small detail, but I'll point out, as part of the design plans, that area will remain fully lit and sidewalks that are adjacent will remain in place. So people still be able to access through there. We're going to change the light pattern a bit so we can get at them and maintain them, but it'll remain a lit area. It just won't be kind of an abandoned piece there.
I think that's very helpful information. I strongly in favor of this incremental approach. I do think it seems like a little challenging space to have just kind of an open green space in the long term. So hopefully we can continue to work with CPAD and sort of others to look for resources to make it something really great for the community, whether that be a more active green space or something that incorporates development.
Right. Yeah. And one more comment I'll bring up. At one of our neighborhood meetings, we had a little bit of a brainstorming session, more than a little bit. And we had a whiteboard and ideas were recorded and, listed and recorded, and they just span the gamut in terms of uses or activities or options for there. So we know we're kind of at square one in terms of what those plans might be.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Seeing none, again, commend the work that we have before us. I think we do have a great framework for additional work moving forward, as has been suggested by other council members, and look forward to that work, actually. And hopefully we can keep the partners at the table and their energy and insights. We don't want, sort of this big push and then everything to kind of wither away. So let's keep on track with that. And so hearing that, I will move approval of the project layout as prepared by Hennepin County and approving the street operational changes that have been described in the presentation. Any further conversation? Seeing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Dissenting nay. That moves forward. Thank you. Now go to our last item on the agenda, which is the 3rd Avenue South redesign project from 1st Street South to 16th Street South, layout approval, cost estimate, easements, and direction to proceed. Director Cockey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess we'd ask your permission if prior to our presentation on the 3rd Avenue, if Ben Hecker, our Deputy Chief of Staff for Mayor Hodges, could make a short presentation regarding, really, I refer to it as Access Minneapolis, our downtown, and as it relates to planning for bike facilities downtown.
No, very appropriate to snap out to the context from which we make our decisions.
Thank you. As Director Cockey said, my name is Ben Hecker. I'm the Mayor's Deputy Chief of Staff, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to your committee today. Because the council is being asked to make such an important decision downtown with the redesign of 3rd Avenue, I wanted to provide you with a little bit of background and an update on the city's Access Minneapolis plan. I'd like to leave you today with a few key takeaways. First, like I said, putting the decision on 3rd Avenue in context of other decisions that have been made downtown already and some of the things that are contemplated as part of that plan. Second, by making sure that there's a common understanding at the city and with the public that the city does not want to put a bike lane on every street. Instead, we want to prioritize quality and safety of the facilities that we put in place. And finally, I want to take the opportunity to look forward to some future opportunities that a decision on 3rd Avenue could provide in the future. So the focus of the presentation today is primarily on the north-south streets for a couple of reasons. 3rd Avenue is a north-south street, and as such, it is affected by decisions that have been made on other parallel north-south streets. And also, 10 years ago, before this plan was put into place, the north-south streets downtown were a complete mess. Before the plan was put in place, like I said, there were a lot of problems, including the fact that buses downtown were spread out across all streets. That led to serious congestion in the core along Nicollet Mall, Marquette, 2nd, and 3rd. Local buses and express buses intermingled, slowing down bus traffic throughout the core. There was no capacity for bus expansion, and downtown Minneapolis was not ready for bus rapid transit. There was nothing rapid about a bus sitting in rush hour traffic in the morning or in the evening. In addition to that, both 1st and Hennepin Avenues were one-way streets. There was one advantage 10 years ago, and that was that on 2nd and Marquette, we had dedicated bike lanes. So the answer to the transit challenge that I just described was specialization. A federally funded project, Mark II, led to an expansion of what were the single transit lanes on Marquette and 2nd to 2 transit lanes on each that allowed buses to pass each other. Before this change, the fastest bus was limited by the slowest bus. But now, added bus capacity on this street means that we can reroute buses off of all the other streets downtown. And there's good news. that change worked. There were a number of benefits that we've seen already from the change, including the fact that local buses are now separated from express buses. That reduces congestion. And on other streets parallel, there's been a benefit as well. On Nicollet Mall, we've seen a 40% reduction in bus traffic. That fact has allowed us to put in place the redesign of Nicollet Mall that you see coming this year. Also, when you concentrate routes downtown, you can provide better amenities at the fewer transit shelters at a lower cost. So you have fewer transit shelters, which means that we can provide the amenities people expect now, real-time displays, heaters, that kind of thing. Fourth, bus speeds are more predictable and they're faster, and bus capacity downtown has tripled. And unlike 10 years ago, now downtown Minneapolis is ready for BRT. Now, there were a few other things that resulted from the change as well. First, because of the concentration of buses on Mark II, we were able to fulfill what was a long-standing desire both from the city and downtown businesses, and we converted both Hennepin and First Avenues into two-way streets. We also added a bike facility on First Avenue, which I'm sure you are aware is hard to describe as good news. This was not something that either the cycling community nor the businesses on the street particularly liked. And in fact, the Bicycle Advisory Committee recently voted to support changing what is a protected lane now into a standard bike lane. The last benefit of the change was that buses have been entirely eliminated from 3rd Avenue. But with all the benefit comes a cost, and it has to do with bike lanes. When the design for Mark II was adopted, the bicycling community was understandably very unhappy that these bike lanes were removed without identification of an alternative. We've been looking for a replacement to those facilities ever since. Corridors that we looked at included a two-way facility on 3rd Avenue, a two-way facility on Nicollet Mall, and even returning one-way lanes to both Marquette and 2nd. That turned out not to be feasible. And through the redesign of Nicollet Mall, the city chose not to add dedicated lanes as part of that redesign, rightfully, prioritizing pedestrian space on the mall. Now, as part of that process, Mayor Hodges said at the time and since that with that decision comes the requirement that we find an alternative north-south protected route downtown. So she asked Public Works to identify a route and make a recommendation, and that is what you'll see today with the redesign of 3rd Avenue. So before we get into the redesign of 3rd Avenue, I do want to take a moment to talk about how we arrived at that as the preferred route. And in doing that, I'd like to talk about 4th and 5th Avenues for a moment. When the 35W bridge collapsed, the rebuilding of that bridge came with federal funds to repair some downtown streets. Now, at the time, both 4th and 5th were in really, really terrible shape, and the traffic lanes on both of those streets were wider than they need to be. So we resurfaced both of those streets and narrowed the lanes to provide traffic calming and to provide for the bike lanes that you see out there today. Now, 4th and 5th Avenues are not good routes for bicyclists. If you look to the south, you can see why. On 4th Avenue, the south end of 4th Avenue is the on-ramp to 35W where bikes can't go. And on 5th Avenue, the south end is the exit from 35W heading north, and bikes can't come from there. So both of those streets are very, very important to the auto network downtown, but they are not particularly important to the bike network. So again, I want to focus on the fact that Minneapolis does not intend to put a bike lane on every street. In fact, doing that would be counterproductive to what we want to achieve, which is quality and safety. We know protected bike lanes are safer than regular bike lanes or shared lanes. We know that volume and visibility improve safety. This is why when we see increased ridership throughout the city, we actually see reduced crash rates. There's safety in numbers. If we were to put a bike lane on every street, we would dilute that. It makes way more sense to put protected lanes where bikes are going to be. So where do we want them to be? Well, Public Works has created the proposed bicycle network downtown, and it provides a good spacing of routes. As you can see, there are not too many routes. They're not too close together, which would create a condition where bicyclists would be spread out throughout the downtown core, and it would dilute some of that visibility that we're looking to achieve. But they're also not so far apart that cyclists can't get from one to the other. And you can also see that the routes on Hennepin and on 3rd both have clear access in and out of downtown across bridges to the north and to the south. And then the last thing I want to leave you with today is some potential future decisions that a redesign of 3rd Avenue today can provide. So just as what we did on Mark II created opportunities that we're taking advantage of now, the same is true for the protected bike lane network that you see in front of you there. A protected bike lane, if and when we add it to Hennepin Avenue, could result in the entire elimination of even the non-protected bike lane on 1st Avenue. And a redesign of 3rd Avenue today could provide an opportunity to remove the bike lanes on 4th and 5th, which could provide, you could use that space to expand pedestrian access and greening on both of those streets. And with that, I will pass the baton back over to Public Works to talk about the proposed redesign itself.
Well,
Thank you for your time.
Providing that comprehensive context. And Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this was very helpful. It's also the history of the founding of the Minneapolis Bicycle Coalition in some ways. I just wanted to point out with this map that the distance between 3rd Avenue and Hennepin is significantly larger in South Minneapolis than it is in downtown. So if we zoomed this map out, the travel sheds for a bicyclist coming from Whittier or, Carrag or the Lena neighborhood, or the folks coming from the 11th Ward or the 8th Ward, certainly Hennepin would be significantly farther away than it is in downtown here. And so I just think it just sort of speaks to the importance of having these parallel north-south routes, that one just on Hennepin, for example, would be significantly out of the way for anyone trying to travel by bicycle from South Minneapolis.
Good point. Thank you. Thank you. Director Kaki.
Mr. Chair, before our project engineer, Chris Engelman, presents the recommended layout of the 3rd Avenue project, I would like to give a little background on the work and interaction we've done to date and why I am recommending the layout that you have in front of you. As Mr. Hecker explained, Public Works was asked to develop a north-south protected bicycle route through what I refer to as kind of the eastern portion of the downtown core. Public Works was in total agreement on this need, and we studied carefully facilities on Marquette Avenue, 2nd Avenue, and 3rd Avenue. All of these streets presented challenges, but it was really the bicycle volume count on 3rd Avenue that indicated it was the right street for the protected bike facility. I think when you look at some of the graphics that Ben has presented, what's interesting is that whether we have a bike facility on a street or not, the bicyclists are going to go where they need to go and want to go. And so, for example, the current counts that we have on 3rd Avenue today, which we don't have any bike facility on 3rd Avenue today, are quite high. As a matter of fact, they're the second highest bike count on the north-south corridors through downtown today. So this is obviously where the bicycles want to be, is on 3rd, and we're seeing that as well over on Hennepin. The layout that I am recommending today was actually our first layout we developed last summer. The original plan and current recommended layouts removed all the center planted medians on 3rd Avenue and eliminates most of the dedicated left turn lanes. So we're moving from a 5-lane configuration to a 4-lane configuration. And it was my understanding at that time that we had general support of the 4-lane configuration that we came up with last summer. However, we did have some concerns. Councilmember Goodman particularly was concerned about the loss of the green medians and the loss of significant loss of greening, and as well as some of the members of the business community. And we are asked to continue looking at options of how to place a protected bikeway onto Third. We then conducted a traffic operations analysis to determine the feasibility of a 3-lane option. Our traffic consultant concluded that in a typical day condition, I'll repeat that, a typical day condition, that south of 8th Street, we could convert 3rd Avenue to a 3-lane configuration and maintain the center medians and provide a protected bike lane and operate at a reasonable level during normal weekdays. However, the consultant also stated that the central business district is a complex and dynamic system, including many variables that influence motor vehicle mobility. The analysis considered only typical day conditions. In other words, bad weather, lane or street closures, areas road construction, on-street parking violations, stadium events may decrease the corridor capacity or increase traffic demand on 3rd Avenue, and these were not evaluated. With these risks assumed, we modified 3rd Avenue layout to a 4-lane configuration north of 8th Street and a 3-lane configuration south of 8th Street. This was the configuration that we presented to the BAC, the PAC, and the downtown community. After numerous meetings with the businesses and property owners along 3rd Avenue, we heard very loudly and clearly that from them, as well as the Minneapolis Downtown Council, Minneapolis BOMA, the Building Owners and Managers Association, and Councilmember Goodman, that that traffic congestion still was a concern for them, and that they would prefer to move back to the original 4-lane option that we had last summer, and that they would work on providing additional greening on the adjacent private properties. Now, I do believe that, these are reasonable concerns, in downtown Minneapolis, we have a lot of variables, unlike probably throughout the rest of the city. And those variables, I mentioned earlier, and particularly what were some of those variables that we're seeing today and we'll probably see continue for the next few years is the issue of construction and lane reductions throughout downtown, which means that we're detouring and traffic is coming from other locations on 3rd that we would consider probably not a normal condition. We do know that a 4-lane would handle and be beneficial for the variable traffic issues that we see in downtown. So with that said, I have worked on many street projects in downtown Minneapolis, and I can tell you it's difficult to accommodate the many needs within the limited right-of-way that we have. I do know that the recommendation does not meet everyone's expectations, but I do believe that the layout is a reasonable compromise between interests that we have and meets our primary objective to get a protected bike lane in this corridor. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris Engelman to go over the proposed layout that we're presenting today, and then we'll answer any questions that you have.
Councilmember Bender?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question on the timeline. So I have a packet from October 17th, 2015 that shows the project that you described with a 3-lane proposal. And then I have resolutions from the Pedestrian Advisory Committee from November 4th, 2015 and March of 2016, as well as resolutions from the Bicycle Advisory Committee on October 24th, 2015, February 24th, 2016, and March 23rd, 2016. When did staff make the decision to change from those layouts?
Early March
of 2016.
Of 2016.
So approximately a few weeks ago.
Approximately a few weeks ago.
Okay. Okay. I'll probably ask more questions about the public engagement process from staff.
Morning.
Committee Chair, council members, my name is Chris Engelman. I'm an engineer with the City of Minneapolis Public Works, Transportation Engineering and Design. I'm here to present on the 3rd Avenue South redesign project. Third Avenue South redesign extends. The proposed project consists of reconfiguring 3rd Avenue South from 1st Street South to 16th Street East, with the primary initial goal of adding a protected bike facility to the corridor. The project includes a variety of right-of-way ownership, including MnDOT highway right-of-way, Hennepin County right-of-way, and is primarily a city of Minneapolis designated state aid route. The roadway is generally configured, as has been expressed before, in a 5-lane configuration with alternating blocks of center left turn lanes or a center planted median. A variety of curb uses is also present on the corridor. The roadway was recently reconstructed in 2004 and is in good condition and good pavement condition. Showing an example of the existing configuration that's out there today. You can see the center green median, 2 drive lanes. We don't show any of the curb uses on this block between, I believe this is 6th to 7th. But it does show that the right-of-way extents, number of trees located already on the corridor. On the alternating blocks, the blocks where it does not have the median, this median is replaced with a left turn lane, a dedicated left turn lane. The corridor supports a variety of different modal uses. There's from the 2014 counts of vehicle traffic, it ranges from the mid 6,000 at the convention center to almost 12,000 vehicles per day north of Washington Avenue. It also supports approximately 4,400 pedestrians a day, as well as has been previously indicated, a relatively high bike count of 850 bikes per day. The bike facility is identified in the protected bikeway update to the bicycle master plan. The corridor was selected, as previously explained, as a primary north-south corridor for bike traffic as part of the coordination of a variety of specialized natures corridors and the transportation system in the downtown core. As a part of the stakeholder engagement, other goals were also identified. There was to improve the pedestrian space by adding greening areas, maintain existing greening space as possible, and then as we had more conversation, the mitigating and minimizing the impacts to the vehicle commercial traffic for ingress and egress to the buildings, for deliveries, and a variety of other needs to the properties along the corridor. These were all identified through the engagement process. The project development, as it was indicated by the director, we started in April 2015 with study and evaluation and initiated the 4-lane configuration. We developed more of an alternatives analysis. What other concerns, what other things can we do, what other options are out there, and adding greening into the 3-lane configuration south of 8th Street configuring, which was due to the volume considerations of the vehicle traffic along that corridor. We were able to come out with a different configuration, viable, workable, and it addressed a lot of the concerns that had been raised up to that point. There was added to the mayor's proposed budget and adopted in the January 16th adopted budget. And at the time that it was included in the mayor's proposed budget, approximately October, we initiated a wider area stakeholder involvement in addition to the design coordination meetings. We used a range of engagement practices to draw out the input on the project, but due to the timeline desire for implementing the project to get a existing a heavily used corridor, a bike facility, The outreach was coordinated as a dual track in the sense that we went out, had conversations about what the concerns were at the same time as we were asking about design detail coordination efforts that we had to have with each property. The engagement, because of the coordinated design, early communication with adjacent property owners and advisory committees were necessary to identify the specific technical considerations. Basically, what are the concerns? What are the issues and needs for this corridor that they see on a daily basis? To allow the time to mitigate those impacts through the design process and be able to implement a project as soon as possible. This led to multiple consultations with Pedestrian Advisory Committee, the Bike Advisory Committee, the DID Greening Committee, Metro Transit, the building owners and managers associations, over 30 one-on-one meetings with the majority of the properties on the corridor. Also, a public meeting was held in January, and we visited with the Loring Park and downtown neighborhood groups to have their consideration and input on the project as well. From this input, as the director indicated, the Public Works is recommending a 4-lane configuration. This consists of bike lanes, typically 6 foot, some of it wider, with a buffer ranging in size with a minimum of 1.5 feet. 2 drive lanes in each direction with widths 10 to 11 feet wide and the necessary reaction distances. Green spaces in locations where space and utilities permit. The placements. These locations, such as at Minneapolis City Hall and Hennepin County Government Center, other green spaces opportunities are still in coordination and with the adjacent properties and with the Downtown Improvement District. We have a few curbside uses that will be adjusted, including removal of parking in locations that are direct conflict with the bike and travel lanes. We're developing or working with the Metro Transit for some new bus stops on 3rd Avenue at north of Washington and the existing drop-off bays. As an example of the operational changes that we're incorporating, we are proposing signal system that would be upgraded to a video vehicle detection system for the purpose of timing the left turn lanes, or left turn arrows, I should say, not lanes. What I'd like to do is walk through the layout in brief manner. I want to kind of emphasize some of the more contextual, how it separates and goes through, and they're generally 2-block increments or that I'm showing on through here. I'm going to start at the river and head down towards 94. The first section here I'm showing is the MnDOT right-of-way. We are proposing to remove the parking. We're adding the buffer bike lanes as is consistent throughout the corridor. We have a couple of additional bus stops, one in front of the federal building, and I'll use the mouse on this one, which is up here, and one in front of as part of the new development. They're adding a bus stops shelter as part of that construction effort. And we show green space on this corridor here. This property is an opportunity. We're still coordinating as it is all the sidewalk and that green space is on federal property. The next section is just south of Washington, so it coordinates with and goes into the MnDOT highway section, but it also crosses the county right away at Washington. What we're showing there is some changes to the configuration of the drive lanes and the facilities coming into Washington. We did receive a variance for narrowing up the drive lanes at that location to accommodate and allow for the bike facilities. We also did receive a variance from Washington to 7th to narrow our drive lanes for that corridor. In a general statement, we're showing a lot of green space throughout the corridor. You can see some green little boxes here. We also have a couple of green spaces. In general, we are still coordinating those efforts. We want to talk to property owners as well as the DID to make sure that we're going to put something in that's survivable. It's going to add benefit to the corridor and is not going to be a maintenance nightmare into the future. So these are opportunities as we're showing them, but there are going to be a lot of conversations that we have to make sure that we are doing the right thing. Another element that I want to quickly point out here is we are showing, you don't see this on a lot of city streets yet, but some what I call zebra striping. The zebra striping, you see it on the municipal MnDOT has them as well, right through here, but they're a bit different, a little bit wider for the city's portion of it, and definitely frame up that pedestrian corridor through the intersection. This is a new city element. We're working on developing this protocol, so there may change, some elements change to it, but we're anticipating implementing it on this project. This is also another interesting portion of the, from an engineering perspective, but as also just as a person walking through this corridor, this one has a lot of primary points of access to the downtown. You have vehicle traffic, obviously, on north-south, but you also have the mass transit. You have a lot of pedestrians coming through this right off of the mass transit, also high use from City Hall and the Hennepin Government Center. You have a highly developed corridor. You have US Bank Plaza, which is a good entry point into the Skyway system. You also have a lot of bikes that use this corridor in this area. So this one was a primary evaluation point to make sure that we're not bottlenecking the entire corridor and what mitigations we could do to improve it. We're also working with US Bank Plaza to incorporate some green space. This drop-off bay configuration is still under evaluation and consideration and coordination with that property owner. So it's expected to change. But we are pretty confident that we'll get some green elements to that corridor at that location. We're also showing some green space improvements and a wider pedestrian ramp at the corner of 4th and 4th Street South and 3rd Avenue South next to the City Hall block. Sixth to 7th, this one is pretty much the end of the what I'll term the north side of things, where the south of this point where you start getting lower vehicle traffic, you start seeing 10-foot drive lanes. We still have 10.8-foot drive lanes through here. The other aspect I'll point out here is that we worked closely with Hennepin County, and they were able to get some more green space, actual planting space instead of trees, and a grade, but actually a planted view. As I mentioned, this switches to the 10-foot drive lanes. This is where the volumes of vehicles traveling through the corridor fall beyond the criteria threshold that we see for a multimodal corridor. So we're able to do a 10-foot drive lane. We still have the bike facility. You still see the, did I not move this one? There we go. Still have the bike facilities. You still see the drive lanes coming through the corridor. You don't see a lot of additional green space. A lot of the green spaces we're able to find is very dependent on maintaining the 8-foot clear zone that we want to have for the downtown environment. There's a lot of utilities, operations on the corridor, not so much at this location, but utilities are present. There's also areaways and underground parking garages that we're addressing and coordinating with to see where green space is practical.
Question from Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Engelman, before you move on to this next part, could you go back through this northern section and talk about why the original determination was made that 3 lanes are not feasible here? What were the trade-offs with vehicle travel delays, and how did you determine that those were unacceptable from a staff perspective?
Thank you for the question. Committee Chair, Councilmember Bender, that's a mouthful. That's a lot of conversation and design detail. We went through a number of analyses that was referred to. The bottom line, pretty much, I mean, this the simplistic answer at this point, without getting into a lot of the weeds as to design details, is the vehicle traffic volumes. What would happen if you went down to a 3-lane configuration? How would that impact the neighboring cross streets? How that would impact the intersections for vehicle traveling through the intersection, for vehicles traveling, pedestrians coming through, and a variety of things. So it's an integrated review of how to make sure our network stays mobile and workable, if that's.
Of course, these design details matter a lot as well to the people using the roadway. So I think these are important points, even though they are rather detailed. Did you use a level of service determination to identify which intersections were not appropriate for a 3-lane configuration? Or were you looking at traffic volumes? Were you looking at minutes of delay? How did this traffic analysis determine that 3 lanes was not appropriate for the northern section?
Director Elwood?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bender. I'm Don Elwood. I'm the Director of Transportation Engineering Design for Minneapolis Public Works. You're asking a very good question when it gets down into the engineering details about delay at intersections and specifically to the corridor of 3rd. I think I want to reiterate, Public Works can make both options work. We've stated that earlier. We can make the 3-lane section option work. We can make the 4-lane section option work. And when I say we can make it work, I have those quotes out there. There are trade-offs. There are mitigation that needs to be put in place with both options. And we are looking at mitigation in the left turn arrows that we're going to put in place with vehicle detection. We're going to use mitigation at the intersection of 5th and 3rd to make things work better. Downtown is dynamic. There's a lot of changes going on, and our traffic operations folks do a great job making changes to the operations on signals to make things flow smoother. So when I looked at the corridor, and we had talked about this earlier, the recommendation for the 4-lane section, there are some concerns about in and out of parking facilities. With a single-lane operation, it's more difficult to get in and out of a parking facility on 3rd. Curbside use is a concern. And the cross traffic coming across at 7th, 8th, 9th is also a concern, and any backups on that corridor. So after looking at all the pieces from a larger perspective in downtown, that 4-lane section is the Public Works recommended layout. Does that address your questions on the specifics?
Yeah, I think that's helpful. I mean, looking at the traffic analysis, I mean, it seems that there may have been even an opportunity to explore a 3-lane configuration in this northern section. So I'm, in my opinion, I'm kind of taking the hybrid option that was originally presented to our advisory committees, and my constituents hadn't any knowledge of this alternative proposal that's come forward today. You know, when I look at the level of service, even for the alternatives there, I'm seeing A, B, C, you know, there's a couple that go to F. So even with that, even if we looked at the entire stretch at 3 lanes, you may conclude that there would be enough mitigation to even do 3 lanes the entire stretch without having a lot of intersections fail if you're using a level of service test. So I'm just trying to understand, in part, what's the difference between the original recommendation on the northern section and the southern section? Does that seem accurate?
I will not disagree with your statement, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bender.
I think we're here before, as far as where I dropped off. Talking about the drive lanes, this was the switch in the vehicle volumes. You don't see a lot of additional green space, and we're still showing all the way through the corridor, the bike lanes and the protected crosswalks and the 4-lane configuration. This block, pretty straightforward as for these other ones as well. Some of the benefits are we were able to find some spots on this block that had open utility space is what I'll say, but enough space that we could put in a tree or 4 and have enough root media to be able to substantiate that, grow that into the future. We do show a loading bay or a drop-off bay at the Ameriprise building as one of the curbside uses that we're intending to maintain. The next section, continuing on the south end, we're showing the 4-lane configuration still through. There's not a lot to be added conversation-wise to this section. And then coming around the corner, around the center, convention center, we're showing 2 lanes into the south and 1 lane to the north. This is a nice graphic that we have that kind of gives a feel for what the 4-lane configuration looks like. It shows the buffered bike facility and the delineators that we typically use in these environments and corridors. You have a bike facility against a 2-foot curb. You also see some of the green space that we're trying to implement along the corridor. This block is right next to the Public Service Center and gives a feel from the existing conditions to the proposed conditions. You can see the turn lane in the center would be removed, and you have 4 drive lanes going forward. The project is on a short timeline. We're wanting to implement this project this year as a proposed project start in 2016. This would be primarily the hard surface pavements, and we want to put in some temporary markings to have a bike facility and operating vehicle facility this end of this year. We anticipate that we would want to come back and finalize this project in 2017 due to the coordination and efforts of the plantings and making sure that any green space we'd have would be able to have a irrigation system as needed. It would also allow us to have a seal coating during our more typical July timeframe and then have the final durable pavement markings placed at the same time. Our estimate for the project is $3 million. In summary, we're excited to move forward with this project. It's provided a great addition to the downtown transportation network and improvement to the corridor. Hits on a lot of the points that Brandon brought before. This is a necessary north-south connection. We have a lot of bicyclists using the corridor, and we want to get that facility out there for them to work. It augments the multimodal nature of our downtown environment. And working with the DID property owners, property managers to provide the additional green space improvements to the pedestrian environment. We'll just go further along that path to make it a good central core business corridor. The neighborhood properties and advisory groups and other stakeholders were very helpful in identifying the concerns and elements that would make this project a success. The communication path that will be maintained and continued as we move forward, and we'll have to close the loop in communication about this short timeline and engagement. But the engagement has not stopped. We will be continuing to have the conversations. We're excited to see a finished corridor as an example of the mixing of many modals choices that you have from the downtown Minneapolis environment. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And I'll just note that we have significant elements that are still in play, and I've had communications with the local representatives on the city council. So what I'm going to do is move without recommendation the project layout before us and take further conversation. Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you. I had a question about the layout, and so I was waiting till the end. Particularly about sidewalks. I noticed that when we were looking at the layout all up and down, we knew the number of feet for bike path and travel lane, but we weren't showing the number of feet for sidewalks. What is the optimum width for a sidewalk in downtown? What's our goal? What's our minimum? And did that, it definitely looked like there was definitely one loading dock that got added, and it looked like there was a 12 or 15-foot sidewalk. I think that might have been by the Thrivent building. So what were we were looking for an 8-foot sidewalk minimum, or do we have a minimum?
That's a great question. Committee Chair, Councilmember Gordon. Throughout the corridor, this project was identified as a redesign. It's not a full reconstruction. We weren't touching a lot of what the existing curb lines are. So what we were attempting to do as far as the greening analysis is to make sure that we had enough pedestrian space through zone as demonstrated in our Access Minneapolis and our sidewalk plans guidance for the downtown environment. Typically, that comes out to be about 8 feet wide through zone that we were looking for. You can go a little bit less than that when you're balancing the priorities, adding trees and a variety of different things, but still the goal, if at all possible, is to maintain that 8-foot clear zone through the corridor.
Okay, thank you. 8 feet. All right. Keep that in mind as we discuss things further.
Councilmember Bender and then Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think all of my colleagues know how important this corridor is to me and my constituents, as my ward just starts a few blocks south of the extent of this project. I'm going to go ahead and move a substitute motion. I had communicated that to staff and my colleagues. That would approve the 3-lane option for 3rd Avenue South for the portion south of 7th Street, which includes 3 vehicular travel lanes, the center planted medians, and the planter protected bike lanes in both directions. My intention here is to go back to the layouts that were presented to our Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. So if there's anything incorrect in the technical details, I had sent them to Director Kotke to check ahead, but that is the motion I would like to make as a substitute.
Substitute motion, Councilmember Palmisano, followed by Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple questions for Mr. Engelmann, if that's
Please.
all right. Let me get back to them. First, I really appreciate the context from Mayor Hodges' office. Thank you. It reminds me why we've allocated, one, so much money for this project, and why we're removing a big amenity, being the planted medians that have gotten mature and they're beautiful. Can you go back to the 3rd Avenue area that is just outside this building, outside of City Hall? One of my chief concerns that I've voiced since last summer has been about how police maintain the best, safest access possible to the drop-off area that's accessed here. It's used for juveniles, and it's critical that we not be any further away from that entry. The other important aspect of this side of our building being about pedestrian improvements. It's a major thoroughfare, and the Pedestrian Advisory Committee expressed significant concerns about it, and I think that's very warranted. Mr. Engelmann, would you say that this is improved from a pedestrian standpoint, and can you assure me that while we've reduced the number of vehicles that can be parked here, is it understood that this is still for police as they need to access it? This is the area of the building that you're talking about, just the lower right part of this slide that you have up.
Mr. Chair, if perhaps if I could answer that. First off, in the pedestrian advisory resolution, they indicated their concerns and problems with the sidewalk adjacent to us right here along 3rd between 4th and 5th. We are in total agreement. That sidewalk is inadequate. Actually, it's inadequate on both sides of City Hall here, and it does need to be addressed. This project is not going to resolve that issue. We agree that it needs to be addressed, and as I had mentioned to the chair, is that we will continue to look at providing a better sidewalk environment there. I'll tell you, there's a couple of issues at hand. One is police department operations. So we need to continue working with them to see if we can find alternatives to parking. The other issue at hand, though, that put it outside the limits of dealing with it during this project is this building has what we refer to as an areaway. So the basement extends out under the sidewalk, and the manner in which the streetlights are tied in there makes it a complicated situation. Not that it can't be resolved, it just is going to take more work, both from an operational perspective as well as from an engineering perspective, to make those corrections, so that there will be some improvements made with this project, but we are really not going to resolve the real issue, which is we need to widen the sidewalk along that corridor.
Thank you. My last question is, since we aren't moving curbs and we're planting a tree or four, as you mentioned, how is that set up for success and not being some kind of drilled tree coffin? I know we're not moving curbs here, so is that something to figure out further along the process, or is that something you already have a plan for?
Committee Chair, Councilmember Fasano, we do have, I'll see if I can get to that relatively easily here. We do have a plan, working with a variety of partners and stakeholders and the park board as well. What we would want to do is make sure that there's enough root media underneath the sidewalk. So we would be removing more sidewalk in this location at between 9th and 10th, and taking the concrete panels off, taking the compacted material underneath there and putting in a more of a structural soil system underneath the sidewalk. We still have to taper it back from the curb line to make sure that we're not undermining the curb. And there's when I say there's not curb being removed, we are removing small sections of curbing to be able to do that. So that's the situation we need to do this. We don't believe so at this location, but we would want to put in the 500 cubic feet of media for these trees to really have a chance to grow.
And that will not compact the sewer line or cause some kind of huge backup? It sounds like we're not impacting the sewer underneath it.
That's the intent, yes.
Thank you. That's it.
Councilmember Yang?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to point out that I thought I heard you make a motion to forward this item with that recommendation, and then I've heard Councilmember Bender make a motion with regards to what she passed out in front of us, and it seems like those two motions are competing, if anything, and I'm wondering if we could address one before the other.
We would take the substitute first. And my recommendation is to do the motion that I made, because it accommodates the time to work out some of these other issues that are some of the secondary and tertiary components of this project, knowing that in no way, shape, or form is the primary objective in question. So it's more of the issues on the edge. So with that,
I do have several more questions for staff. We didn't get to the southern section and vehicle volumes, service levels, any of that. So I just want to acknowledge.
So you have more questions, okay.
Significant.
Okay, so Councilmember Glidden, and then Gordon, and then you.
If Councilmember Bender has more questions, then I'll go ahead and let her go, because mine was more in the nature of a comment, although just because we're kind of getting down to what is this debate between the multiple layouts that have been out there, and so I don't know if staff has brought any visual, just so we can understand what that visual was of the 3-lane design, knowing that staff's recommendation is the 4-lane, which you've presented. So,
thank you. Councilmember Gordon?
Oh, thank you very much. And I wanted to speak in favor of the substitute. If we want to get questions out of the way, that's fine too. Also, I will note that I have some pretty deep concerns about the sidewalk and City Hall and the pedestrian realm there, and I'd like to talk about that and have a motion on that, but maybe we better decide. So I just want to make sure that's in the queue, whether we go forward with the substitute or forward with no recommendation. I want an opportunity to talk about that afterwards, and now I'll be a good committee member and stick on the motion before us. So I actually was excited about the presentation that I got. I wasn't informed in part of the fully 4 lanes up and down the whole route. I didn't get informed about this project until there was a presentation made to me in my office where it was 4 lanes for some and 3 lanes for other. and I appreciated it. I liked it. I accepted it. I thought it was great. Not too long ago, I heard that there was pressure coming from business owners, particularly in the area, worried about what's going to happen if they lose a lane. And that reminded me of some experience that I have had, some big projects that I have lived through. I could understand that completely. It seems to happen every time we have a project and we're going to remove some lanes that a lot of people are worried and fearful about it, concerned about it, have objections, can't believe it could ever possibly work. So I thought back, Riverside Avenue, that was a big one. Big, busy street. We did a lot of work on that, and we decided we were going to add some bicycle infrastructure. We actually did it was interesting, we did a pilot there where we painted the new configuration before we actually put it in, so everybody got to try it out for a year. So that was a significant move where we went from 4 to 2, and in some cases from 4 to 3. Franklin Avenue actually was converted before I was on the council. We didn't have, later it got improved to actually make bike lanes, but that went on a significant road diet, as we say, a long time ago. Busy street, Franklin. Lots of cars travel on that every day, lots of intersections to deal with. It went down from 2 to 3 in some cases when there's left turns involved. Most recent one, Cedar Avenue, and that could have been, that was pretty hard to believe. So this is that little stretch of Cedar Avenue between 94 and 35W. Somehow the MDOT forgot to actually put in a connection there, so there's lots of traffic on there, very busy. People couldn't imagine what we would do there. How could we do this? Actually, on one side of Cedar Avenue, the sidewalks were, well, I'll say on both sides, they're pretty horrible. Those of you who were part of the project will remember. But one side particularly narrow, and there was a lot of interest. Can't we get some more pedestrian realm? Because yes, there was a lot of traffic, but there were a lot of pedestrians. And I'll also note on Riverside, Franklin, and Cedar, lots of biking. These are all close to the university campus. Lots of bikes were on there. So I thought, well, I can appreciate this, but downtown, 3rd Avenue, there's got to be a lot more cars on 3rd Avenue than there would be on Franklin, Riverside, or Cedar, right? That's downtown. There's all those office towers. There's all those buildings. Think of all the commuters coming in and out. Of course, we couldn't expect them to go to 3. So I said, we've got to get some traffic counts, and I've got to see about this to find out. So I looked up, and the daily count on 3rd and 7th downtown is 9,687 cars a day. Whoa, that's a lot of cars, right? Let's check back to my projects. Riverside, very involved in that one. Oh, wait a minute, 13,112 cars a day, and the 3 lanes are working really good. That's at 23rd and Riverside, right by the big hospital. It's at the peak, people have to get ready and adjust, but it's nothing like it is on other parts of even downtown. So Franklin Avenue, 13,885 cars a day. That's at Franklin and 23rd. That's a 2-lane. So Riverside and 23rd has a turning lane on it, but this just has 2 lanes. 13,885 compared to 9,687. I'm on that road. Sure, on the peak hour it gets a little bit busy, but I have to tell you, the peak hour is pretty small. In fact, sometimes the real peak around those parts is a half hour, and what we're building our street for is for 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and there's a lot of time when there's no cars there at all. And Cedar Avenue at 5th, and that was when I think people were pretty concerned about that before we put that in, and we actually had to put in a kind of a pedestrian worked on that a lot. It went down to 2 lanes. That's 13,401 cars. So what that told me was those streets all had more cars and were actually busier than 3rd and 7th. 3 lanes are probably going to work way better there even than what I have now. And I'll tell you, on Franklin and on Riverside and on Cedar, people who live there think it's great. All of a sudden crossing is safer. All of a sudden getting around is safer. The sidewalks are wider. They can get through. People who are driving, most of them have no problem with it. They're using the road a lot, and there's no congestion. There's no problem. In fact, I don't get complaints about Cedar and Riverside. Occasionally, I get some at Franklin right across from the Wells Fargo, but we can talk about that later. It's access there. But so I also looked at the peak times, and the peak times, and I don't have to go over all the numbers for you, but for example, the peak at 3rd and 8th Street during that peak hours, 1,326 cars per hour. The peak at Franklin Avenue and 11th is 2,635. And on the Riverside and 23rd, I mentioned, it's 1,403. So that told me that even at peak, we have intersections that are working well, that have 2 or 3 lanes, that have more cars than we're going to get on the peak here. I know this kind of discussion doesn't really work with kind of the conventional wisdom and what people think is going to happen to their road when we change it, but it does, and we can do this, and it's going to make it better for bikes. It's going to make it safer for cars, pedestrian, and bikes. The traffic experts probably know a lot more about the dangers involved in a 4-lane compared to a 3-lane, and I've learned since I've been on the council, there's this thing called a double threat. And it's pretty significant, and it leads to injuries and accidents. It's a threat you get because you look out there, whether you're a car, a bike, or a pedestrian, and you see that car closest to you actually slowing down and maybe even stopping for you. So you think, okay, I can cross now. This is great. And once you get out to that car, you realize that other car that's coming, the second double car, hasn't seen you. They don't know you're coming, and they're not stopping for you. And the more we can eliminate those kind of double threats on our streets, the more people are going to be safe, and the more we're going to be able to have a good traffic system. So I commend the staff on the looking at these, doing the careful analysis, and deciding what's best. And I think that if we moved forward to the council with supporting that option with the 3-lane down on the side, we'd be in better shape for the council to deal with it and work on it. And I think that ultimately even the businesses in the area are going to appreciate having the safer streets and seeing that the traffic still works really well for all modes. Thanks.
Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We were able to get those traffic volumes and level of service information for the northern stretch, where even there we would be able to do a road diet with some mitigations and still, as I believe, meet MnDOT standards and other sort of engineering standards related to road diets. We're not considering that. In my opinion, that makes it already a compromise that's before us here today. But I want to understand better how you arrived at supporting the 3-lane version of the southern section when you went to the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committees. The chairs of those committees are standing behind you. So I want to understand what are the traffic vehicle volumes in the southern stretch? How do they compare to the northern stretch? Councilmember Gordon has gone through a lot of road diets. I had one in my ward on Lindell Avenue South, the County Road. It has double the amount of traffic volumes, even at peak period, than this stretch of the road. So I want to understand what's going on here. Why are we prioritizing vehicle throughput over every other user on this road with 6,000 vehicles per day?
I'm sorry, could you rephrase the question? I just want to make sure I'm getting that to the right point.
What are the vehicle volumes on this stretch of roadway south of 8th Street to 11th Street? How do they compare to the vehicle volumes north? Why did you conclude originally that you could do only a 4-lane version in the northern section, but that you could support a 3-lane version in the southern section before stakeholders from the business community asked staff to change their recommendation?
So, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bender, if I understand correctly, the vehicle volumes on this corridor play into a number of conversations, as well as the cross streets and how everything comes together. But we came up with the 3-lane configuration, the kind of the hybrid, reducing it from the 5 to the 3, and then 5 to 4 in the north end. It's part of coordination with a lot of our stakeholders. And as we move forward, we had more input and more conversation with the stakeholders, that wider net, as it were, to talk about these concerns that that were brought up about operating and managing the configuration. Both the 3-lane south of 7th and the 4-lane south of 7th and 4-lane north of 7th, for both those options, underwent the analysis review. We feel that both of these are viable options. Both are workable. These are good solutions, with the understanding that there are some trade-offs and priorities between the two that have ingress, egress out of the buildings, how you are able to go into the cross streets, how you're able to manage during peak periods of non-standard, the non-typical day, when you have double game day, when you have severe weather, when you have construction and a variety of other developments, and how that comes into. So all these came into play. So those were the trade-offs between the 4th lane and the 3-lane, and that's what we went with the recommended 4-lane configuration for the entire corridor.
The information that I have from staff in the traffic study indicates that the traffic vehicle volumes at the PM peak range from about 500 to at the highest 1,300, 26 vehicles per day. Does that sound right? In the southern section.
You have Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bender, you're reading right there. I would say that it seems correct, yes.
As I mentioned, Lindell Avenue South in my ward had a road diet managed by the county as a reconstruction project before I took office, but I was curious there because my constituents actually, one of my biggest complaints is actually the unsafe conditions on the 4-lane configuration of Lindell Avenue north of Lake Street. And Commissioner Green and I get frequent communications from our constituents about changing the unsafe conditions there. So I was curious about the southern section where there was a road diet done to convert the street from 4 to 3 lanes. And actually the vehicle volumes there at the peak period in the PM time are double those on the section of 3rd Avenue in downtown where staff had recommended 3 lanes. I just think this is important information to put into context. We have a road in my ward where the peak period vehicle volumes are twice as high as the vehicle volumes in the peak period on 3rd Avenue. So I just want to make sure we all understand what we are doing here when we forego this 3-lane option, which requires us to tear out expensive infrastructure. And in my ward in Lindale, people would, we had to invest a lot of money in order to create that 4 to 3-lane conversion. So it's kind of why I'm reemphasizing this point. I also want to get us to understanding what is the benefits of 4 to 3-lane conversions. I haven't heard any staff talking about why the fine folks from the BAC and the PAC may be standing here and why so many people are here today. Why is this important to people in our community who walk and bike and drive along this roadway every day?
Let me see if I can help. First off, Councilmember Gordon, thank you. You've raised some very good points, and you brought up some very good topics about traffic volumes, ADTs, number of moving lanes, as you have. I've been involved with all of those projects, and both of you know that. I've done citizen participation across this city in most of your wards, and we deal with businesses, and we deal with all sorts of issues that come up on individual projects. So one of the questions has to get with just ADTs or just the number of lanes. And I think that's easy to look at something and say it's just about ADTs. But I also, the average daily traffic is when I say ADTs, and I apologize for using those engineer terms from my staff. But when I look at 3rd in downtown, we have a signal system in every single block. We have pedestrians crossing the corridor and crossing along the corridor, and we have curbside uses, and we don't always get that situation across the city everywhere. And so there are a number of considerations that come into play when we look at making a recommendation on a layout. You asked about specific questions about, I believe, the traffic volumes on the south section of 7th. I don't have that number in front of me. We can get that information for you. You also asked a question about, one other question, if you can remind me what that was towards the end there.
Actually, Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask our bicycle and pedestrian coordinator to come up and talk about why 4 to 3-lane conversions are identified by the Federal Highway Administration as a proven safety countermeasure, and why we would have invested so much of our federal non-motorized transportation pilot program dollars into road diets in order to improve safety on roads for all users. Our former bicycle and pedestrian coordinator was the person who managed those projects, but I would like to ask Mr. Deardahl to answer that question since we're not able to hear from our bicycle and pedestrian advisory committee about why they took so many motions in favor of that.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bender, as you noted
in the non-motorized transportation pilot program, we implemented a lot of road diets. And I think one of the main reasons that we did that, or that we do that, is because of the space that is available. When there's 4 lanes, you can basically get bike lanes by removing 1 lane in each direction and providing a turn lane and bicycle lanes. And then the other sort of general reason is, I believe, because of the double threat option that was mentioned in the past. And I just want to note, I think the double threat is really at a non-signalized environment where 1 car will stop when the vehicle is not controlled to stop, and then the other one passes around.
Are you familiar with the Federal Highway Administration study and the other studies from cities across the country that have shown the safety impacts of 4 to 3 lane conversions? And could you talk about how they impact drivers, pedestrians, and bicycle safety on roadways which previously had 4 lanes and then are converted to 3 lanes?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Bender, I'm a little bit familiar with that report. I don't have the numbers in memory, but I believe I've seen vehicle crashes decline, among other perceived safety benefits.
Thank you. Just for the benefit of committee members, I believe that information was forwarded to us by Mr. Foley and had an average of 29% vehicle crash reduction for all users, including drivers, on roads that had seen 4 to 3 lane conversions. That was a study done by the Federal Highway Administration. Of course, many cities across the country, Seattle, San Francisco, have done large studies of their 4 to 3 lane conversion programs, which have seen significant safety improvements for all users on the road. I just think it's important that we understand why this might be important to people who live and travel through our city. Thank you.
Any other conversation? Councilmember Glidden?
Thanks. And I think that we're getting to being able to vote on sort of options before us. And so I just thought I might make a few comments on this. And I will say this is many people spend a lot of time in downtown, and I've worked in downtown since the mid-90s and close to 3rd Avenue, and kind of feel like I've got some familiarity with the street. It's interesting that I usually choose to both drive down the street, but also when I ride my bicycle. And I'm the kind of bicyclist that everybody passes on Portland and Park, so just so you know, but I usually choose to ride on 3rd Avenue as well, in part because the traffic is less than on other streets. And even though it doesn't have a bike lane, I feel safer on that street. I have heard from a lot of constituents on this. I actually was a little bit surprised because I don't represent downtown, and I don't always hear from a lot of constituents on projects that are in downtown, but I have heard from a lot of constituents on this particular one. Constituents that are very interested in being able to have the protected bike lane, but also who are very interested in what was some of the concepts that were presented in the 3-lane proposal, including incorporation of the buffer and the median and other components of that. And many of those constituents talk to me about their work downtown and their traveling downtown and kind of are speaking from that experience. I do understand that there are a lot of competing interests downtown, a lot. And so I just really want to appreciate that. I don't think there's one crystal clear, answer that is here about all the different interests downtown. We have traffic data, we have the work that comes from the different stakeholders, including our own committees that have tried to do their best to evaluate and give us their advice. And so I appreciate that. Voting today, I would support the option that incorporates the 3-lane version. My guess, though, is that we are a divided committee. And if my guess is correct, we're going to vote on this, and it may fail. And then we will be back to Councilmember Reich's suggestion that we vote on a no recommendation, which I think is a good one that he made. So I just wanted to give that signal and let people know what I have been hearing and that I care very much about this street. And I do really appreciate the thoughtfulness with which I've heard from many. And I talked about my constituents, but I've also heard from BOMA and some of the business interests. And so I just want to acknowledge that as well.
Thank you for that. So what we have before us, unless there's more conversation in lieu of Bender's motion. You wanna-
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to really briefly say that the exciting piece of this discussion is that we are not discussing whether or not to put in a protected bike lane. We will have a protected bike lane on 3rd Avenue in downtown after years since 2009 of having basically no safe dedicated facility in basically all of downtown, depending on how you feel about 1st Avenue. So it's an exciting day, and I hope we can get the safest option here. Thank you.
Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make a couple of comments, cognizant of Councilmember Gordon's comments, which I appreciate very much. I need to share that we've considerably constrained some of these buildings, and they're quite a bit larger than the buildings in the Cedar Riverside area. There's a lot more people that work at them each day. There's a lot more people transiting through, and I think there are more competing stakeholder interests here because we are downtown, like Vice Chair Glidden was saying. With the light rail on one side of these buildings, changes to 2nd Avenue and to South 6th Street, I believe that I have to trust that our traffic engineers have significantly looked at these streets to find other kinds of solutions for the difficulties that these buildings have, especially when there isn't something like a loading dock for them to easily pull in and out of. But they are also our partners downtown. I'm appreciative that our staff has engaged them, albeit a little bit late by some people's accounts. But I think this is an aspect of coming up with solutions that everyone can live with. And coordination with all the stakeholders means engaging the business community here too. We're removing a beautiful amenity, one that they paid for. And furthermore, we're asking their participation in adding to the greening here. We're asking for their money in the public right-of-way to invest in this street again. So it's going to take their cooperation. I see them as a pretty key stakeholder. I'm not a traffic engineer, and neither are they. I've got a lot of familiarity with this street. I use it almost every day, and my constituents have lobbied me quite a bit from every aspect of this project. But also from the aspect of safety on this 400 block of 3rd Avenue South. I think that until we figure out those other issues with the areaway, I am comfortable that Director Kotke is committed to doing things like widening this street, but I am not willing to remove parking on this full block because that would mean the access for police to bring juveniles into our facility. So I can't support that. But I appreciate the intent, and I just wanted to make that clear. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Glidden, is that a? Okay. So thank you, and we'll talk about the City Hall thing in just a second. So thank you. So we have before us a motion to go to the 3-lane option as described by Councilmember Bender in her motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Dissenting nay? Nay.
I think that's for a roll call vote, please, Mr. Chair.
Roll call vote.
Councilmember Gordon?
Yes.
Yang?
No.
Glidden? Bender?
Aye.
Palmisano?
No.
Chair Reich?
No.
There are 3 yeas and 3 nays.
And so now we have before us a motion that basically forwards without recommendation, given that there's still some considerable discussion to be had between now and the full council. All in favor of that motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Dissenting nay? Oh, so we have 1 name, but that does carry. And so we can proceed with the project with further conversation contemplated. We have I believe Councilmember Gordon wishes to have some further direction regarding some of the work that still needs to be done, considerable work that needs to be done around City Hall.
Thank you very much. And maybe if we could get the City Hall block just on the screen, that would help. If we could go to the slide of.
I do have a larger one.
Or overhead. So I still would like us to resolve the issue about the City Hall block. I know that everybody's aware of it. Before we get the picture on your screen, I have mine up from the staff report. But my issue is the poor quality of the pedestrian access there. And if you think about this, we have our light rail station on one side of our building, and when you're trying to get to the station or get off the station, it's you can't even get into the building there if you're handicapped or if you have a lot of luggage. You couldn't get into the building. The handicapped entrance to our building is actually around on the other side. Also, I'm interested in having the city lead by example and make sure that we have the best pedestrian realm as we can around our buildings. And if I think any of us have walked around the building, we know that there's a couple of spaces where our sidewalk is very difficult. Over on the 4th Avenue side, it's probably even worse. There's curb cutouts, there's a driveway there, even there's slanted sidewalks, so it's not a really good alternative. So if you were going to try to walk, the best option would be to come over to the 3rd Avenue side, and I think we have a real opportunity here to improve that pedestrian realm. So people who are in a wheelchair or handicapped in a scooter, maybe they're passing somebody who's dragging along a big suitcase, trying to get up to the station. We want to have a space where they can move comfortably. And I appreciate we're not moving the curbs anywhere. It looks a little bit like we're doing a little work with the curb when I look at this and I see the brown section and the trees that are added there. So I think it's possible that there is some curb work going on. I appreciate there's some complexity because there's an areaway. I think about the areaway and I think about cars parking over the areaway, and I think we're trying to move it to have pedestrians walking over the areaway and bikes, and I don't quite understand all the complexities, but I'm just a council member. I'm not a fully certified engineer who understands how lighting connects to things like that. So I have a motion that would try to include the layout, constructing the wider unobstructed sidewalks on this full block, continuing the protected bikeway, and removing all the parking, which I think is the resolution I want us to get to. I also think it's a resolution supported by our advisory groups. I also think we heard recently from Mr. Kotke that he supported that resolution. I know there's concerns about the cost and added engineering. It's also hard for me to believe that as part of a $3 million project, we couldn't figure out how to handle that and get that engineering done, or we couldn't figure out how to find a little additional revenue to get it done to be part of this project. Because my fear is, if not now during this project, when would we get to it, and how challenging would that be? And I appreciate that what we have probably is some different departments having different goals, and we're stuck in this spot. So the council could weigh in here and clarify. I just do want to add that I believe we could work hard and look at 4th Avenue. We could look at the other entrance where we have some meters. I mean, I think we could be sensitive to the needs of the police department to have their loading bay here and replace some parking. And I also just want to mention that for the long term, we've heard from property services that these functions are very likely going to move when we rearrange the campus. So for the long term, we might not even need the loading bay. That demand might disappear in 2 years. So I'd like us to work on this. Maybe the motion to amend the layout is too much for the committee at this point, but perhaps a motion to have a staff direction to do everything humanly possible to fit this into the project this year should be done, or something to that effect. So colleagues or committee chair, if you have some suggestions for language and how this could be a staff direction instead of amending the proposal, I would be open to that.
Okay, to that end, and this is certainly some conversation we've been having, knowing that this was an additional issue that needed certainly some additional resources and additional work, and we're very committed to that. To the extent that we can do as much as we can to incorporate it in this timeline, because I do not want any one component of the project to delay the overall project, and I know that's not your intention as well. And so what I would recommend is that we would perhaps put it as a staff direction to continue the additional engineering work with a goal to incorporate it in this project if possible, because there's clear efficiencies in that and certainly some expectations can be met. But failing that it would be a project that would be amended simultaneous with other considerations around the full side of this City Hall block, knowing that that's part of the scope of this overall project and solution. Director Kotke.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and perhaps just to respond to the comments you just made. The objective, I'm in total agreement with. Love to see the sidewalk widened. My only concern, and I think talked to all of you about this, is it's very important to me in the department that we keep this project moving forward. We have construction crews scheduled to do the work on 3rd Avenue, and I just want to make sure that the determining how to make the improvements next to City Hall here, and also the issue of budget, doesn't prolong or hold off the other improvements that we want to make along the corridor. So I guess if, preference would be as if something along the lines of the staff doing everything humanly possible to to come up with some solutions for that, and then report back to council both on the option as well as budgetary issues associated with it.
Very good. So that would be the understanding of the staff direction and the work that you would proceed based on that.
Yep.
Does that satisfy your intent, Councilmember Gordon?
It does. When I was listening to you read the staff direction, I'm not sure if the clerk was able to capture everything that you said, but also I noticed you left out everything humanly possible. So I appreciated that the director added that in. So at least we know that's the sentiment and the expectation, even if it's not in the staff direction. And that includes from me.
So I think we've got the core intent is clear with the clerk and with staff, which is the most important thing. Sorry for the lack of hyperbole on the motion, but that's the staff direction. All in favor of that staff direction, say aye.
Aye.
Dissenting nay? That carries. And so we now have an additional staff direction. I think that will be consuming us with additional work, but important work as Councilmember Gordon has laid out. So with that, we have concluded today's agenda. Thank you for all the input, and we are adjourned.